Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep. So before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Let's get comfy and relaxed and let's begin. Story 1. It was supposed to be a peaceful camping trip, just me and the stars. I had planned it for weeks. No phones, no distractions. Just me in the woods with nothing but my thoughts and the crackling of a campfire to keep me company. The kind of quiet that felt sacred. The kind of peace that only the wilderness could offer. But that night, something was different. It started off normal. I pitched my tent in a small clearing near the edge of the woods. The kind of place where you could still see the stars between the tall trees. The firewood I gathered burned bright, casting flickering shadows that danced against the trunks. The cool evening air had a crisp bite to it, the kind that reminds you that winter's on its way. I sat there for a long time, staring into the fire, listening to the crackling, breathing in the pine-scented air. It was perfect. As the night wore on, I noticed the wind starting to pick up. It wasn't anything unusual, just the trees swaying in the breeze, the leaves rustling as they had done for ages. But then, something changed. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but soon enough, the rustling wasn't just the leaves. It was the sound of something else. A voice, soft at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. I froze. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, twisting the branches into something they weren't. But the voice that was too clear, too deliberate. Come closer. My heart skipped a beat. I stared out into the darkness of the trees, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just the wind. There was something else out there. Someone. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff, and walked toward the edge of the clearing. The voice was faint, but it was still there, faintly carrying through the rustling leaves. It wasn't a sound I could explain. There was no emotion in it, no warmth or sense of friendliness. It felt wrong, like the trees themselves were trying to pull me in. Come closer. The voice again, this time with more insistence. My stomach twisted into a knot, but my feet moved of their own accord. It wasn't like I had a choice. It felt like I was being guided, pulled into the darkness. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to turn back, but my curiosity was stronger. I couldn't just walk away. I needed to know who was out there, what it wanted. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped off the edge of the clearing, the beam cutting through the darkness. The forest was vast, the trees stretching up like towering, gnarled arms, their branches swaying in the wind. I could feel the eyes of the woods on me, watching, waiting. I kept walking, following the whisper, as it continued to call my name in that same eerie tone. I walked farther and farther, deeper into the woods, the path becoming less clear with every step. The ground beneath my boots was soft, the soil moist from the recent rain, and the air felt heavier the deeper I went. It was like the forest was alive, breathing, shifting around me, but there was no one there. The whispering was the only sound, guiding me forward, as though it knew exactly where I was going. Come closer. The voice sounded like it was right beside me now, but there was no one. Nothing. Just the trees, their shadows stretching long and dark, their branches reaching out like fingers. I stopped. I had been walking for what felt like hours, but there was nothing here. No clearing, no figure, no sign of anyone. Just an endless stretch of trees, the whisper echoing louder and louder in my ears, until it became all-consuming, drowning out everything else. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, tapping it with my palm. The light came back on, but now it felt useless. It was like the darkness itself had taken over, and no amount of light would push it back. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the forest floor behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam swinging wildly, but there was nothing. Just the same empty stretch of trees, the same oppressive darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, listening. The footsteps were gone, but the silence that followed was even worse. It was thick, suffocating, like the entire forest was holding its breath. "Come closer." The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the trees. It was behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it. The voice was in my head now, echoing in my thoughts, pushing me forward. I couldn't fight it anymore. Something deep inside me told me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like I was trapped in place, unable to break free of the spell the voice had cast on me. The wind picked up again, swirling through the trees, but the whispering didn't stop. It was everywhere now, all around me. The woods had swallowed me whole. "Come closer." I turned my head slowly, half expecting to see someone standing behind me. But there was nothing, just the trees, just the silence. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic crunching sound, like footsteps, but they weren't on the forest floor. They were behind me, above me. I looked up, my heart in my throat. There, perched on a branch high above me, was a figure. Its face was hidden, just a dark shape against the night sky. But I could feel its eyes on me, watching me. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by fear. The whispering was louder now, almost deafening, and the figure, whatever it was, didn't move. It just watched me, its presence suffocating the air around me. "Come closer." And then, just as quickly as it had all started, everything went silent. The whispering stopped. The footsteps stopped. The figure in the tree was gone. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but when I finally snapped out of it, the forest was still and quiet again. No more whispers, no more sounds, just the rustling of the leaves in the wind. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back at my camp, my tent, my fire, the safety of the clearing. I didn't even look back. But even now, months later, when I close my eyes at night, I hear it, the whisper, calling to me from the woods. I can still feel its pull, like it's waiting for me to come back. And part of me wonders what would happen if I did. But I'll never find out. I don't go back to the woods. Not ever. Story 2. Moving into that apartment felt like a fresh start. It was a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people nodded at you in passing, but never got too close. Just the way I liked it. The building was old, but well kept. A sturdy little structure with creaky floors and doors that swelled in their frames when it rained. It had character, and I liked that. I settled in quickly, filling the space with my things, making it my own. The bedroom was my favorite part. A big window overlooked the empty street below, framed by long, heavy curtains that I rarely bothered to close. At night, the street lights cast long beams into the room, washing it in a pale orange glow. I found it comforting in a way. The first time I saw it, I was half asleep. You know that space between waking and dreaming, where the world feels just a little bit off. That's where I was, lying in bed, facing the window, my eyes fluttering open and closed as I drifted. And then there, a shape in the glass. It took my brain a few seconds to catch up. Someone was standing behind me. I went rigid, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall, draped in something dark and heavy. A coat? A cloak? I couldn't tell. But what got me, what really sent ice through my veins, was that it wasn't moving. Not even a little. No shifting weight. No rise and fall of breath. Just standing. I swallowed hard and forced myself to turn over. The room was empty. A trick of the light, I told myself. A weird shadow cast by something outside. Maybe a tree swaying in the wind. I didn't look back at the window. I didn't want to. Instead, I pulled the covers tighter around me and willed myself to sleep. The next night, it happened again. This time, I was awake. Fully, painfully awake, staring at my phone, my eyes burning from scrolling too long. When I set it down and rolled onto my side, I saw it clear as anything. The same figure, standing there in the reflection, right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly fell out of bed. Nothing, just my empty room, silent and still. My skin prickled. Slowly, I turned back to the window. The figure was still there, still watching. I launched out of bed, heart hammering, and yanked the curtains shut so hard they nearly tore from the rod. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, my back pressed against the headboard, listening, waiting. Days passed, and I tried to pretend it was my imagination. But every night, as soon as the lights went out, I felt it. That weight of unseen eyes pressing against me. I kept the curtains closed, but that didn't help. I still knew it was there. Then things got worse. One night, as I lay curled under the blankets, something shifted. A sound, soft and slow. Fabric dragging across the floor. My breath caught. It was behind me. I didn't move. Didn't even blink. My mind screamed at me to turn over, to look, to see what was standing in my room, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. The whisper of fabric came closer, closer. I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed. And then it stopped. The silence stretched. I felt a presence, heavy and cold, right at the edge of the bed. I knew, somehow, that if I opened my eyes, I would see it. So I didn't. I lay there, rigid, forcing my breath to stay even. Minutes passed. An hour. Finally, morning light crept through the curtains, and I dared to move. The room was empty, but on the floor, right beside my bed, the hardwood was smeared with something dark, like wet footprints leading back to the window. I moved out that same day. I thought leaving would be enough. A new place, fresh walls, a different window. But it wasn't, because last night, as I was brushing my teeth, something caught my eye in the bathroom mirror. A shape standing just behind me, watching, waiting, and this time it was closer. Story 3. I never pick up hitchhikers, not because I don't feel for them, but because I know the world's a dark place, and some of those shadows were human skin. But that night, that rain-soaked, godforsaken night, something in me hesitated just long enough. The storm had rolled in fast, thick sheets of rain slamming against my windshield as I wound my way down Route 46, a stretch of Tulane blacktop that cut through nothing but miles of empty trees. My headlights caught the shape of her standing by the roadside, drenched, her long, dark hair clinging to her face like something out of a drowned nightmare. She wasn't waving frantically or running into the street like some desperate hitchhikers do. No, she just stood there, thumb out, head slightly bowed, rain dripping from her fingers. Something about her posture made my stomach tighten, but I pulled over anyway. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was instinct, but whatever it was, I wish I'd ignored it. She slid into the passenger seat without a word, water pooling at her feet. I turned the heat up, figuring she must be freezing, but she didn't shiver, didn't rub her arms, or try to warm her hands. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, her wet clothes clinging to her thin frame. "You okay?" I asked, glancing at her out of the corner of my eye. A slow nod. That was all. I told myself she was just in shock, that she had to be, because if she wasn't, that meant something was wrong. I tried again. "Where you headed?" A pause, and then, so soft I barely heard it over the rain. "Home." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. Not because of the word itself, but because of how empty it sounded. No relief, no warmth, just a hollow whisper, like wind through a dead tree. I gripped the wheel a little tighter and nodded, even though she wasn't looking at me. "All right," I said. "Just tell me where to turn." She didn't. The road stretched on, winding through the dark trees, the rain hammering against the roof. I told myself she was probably too cold, too tired to talk. Maybe she'd been walking for hours. Maybe she'd had a fight with someone, stormed out, and regretted it when the weather turned. But then I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was staring at me, not out the window, not at the road, at me. Her eyes, dark, sunken, wide and unblinking, locked onto mine. I nearly swerved off the road. My stomach twisted in a way that felt too deep, too unnatural, and I forced myself to look straight ahead. "Calm down," I told myself. Maybe she was just checking to see if I was trustworthy. Maybe she was nervous, but that didn't explain her hands. White, not pale, not just cold, but paper white, the kind of white you see in something long dead. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to get her out of my car. "How far is home?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. The silence stretched. I didn't look at the mirror again. I couldn't. And then, a whisper, right next to my ear. "You missed the turn." I nearly slammed on the brakes. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting perfectly still in the seat beside me. Hadn't leaned in, hadn't shifted an inch, and yet I'd felt her breath against my skin. "Where?" I croaked. She lifted one of those colorless fingers, pointing toward a narrow dirt road barely visible through the trees. I hesitated. Every part of me was screaming not to turn, not to keep driving, not to go anywhere but forward. But my hands moved on their own, twisting the wheel. The road was rough, nothing but packed earth and rain-slicked mud, winding deeper into the forest. The trees pressed in close, branches scraping against the roof like fingers. My heart pounded harder with every passing second. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the road ended. A clearing, a house, old, abandoned, the windows shattered, the door barely hanging on its hinges. I turned to her to ask if this was some kind of joke, but she was gone. The seat beside me was empty, except for a puddle of rainwater and the faint impression of where she'd been sitting. My breath caught in my throat. I turned in my seat, scanning the road behind me, the trees, the clearing, nothing. No sign of her. No footprints in the mud. Nothing. A gust of wind howled through the broken windows of the house, and something inside shifted, the creak of wood on wood. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. The house, the clearing, the road, all of it blurred into a nightmare haze as I sped back onto the main road, not stopping, not looking back. When I got home, I locked every door, every window, took a shower so hot my skin burned, but I still felt cold. The next day, I tried to find that road again. It wasn't there. I drove up and down Route 46 for hours, but there was no turn-off, no dirt path, no clearing. It was just endless trees. I haven't driven down that highway since, and I never will. Story 4. I never believed in ghosts. I never thought much about the supernatural at all. But that night, alone in my friend's house, I learned that some things can't be explained. Some things, once they find you, never really leave. It started out simple, easy. My best friend, Hannah, had begged me to babysit her newborn daughter, Lily, for just a few hours. Just until midnight, she'd said, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead before grabbing her coat. She's a great sleeper. She won't even wake up. I should have known better. Nothing is ever that easy. Hannah's house was small but cozy, the kind of place that felt warm even in the dead of winter. The nursery was at the end of the hall, painted soft shades of pink and white. A rocking chair sat in the corner, facing the crib where Lily slept, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. She was perfect, peaceful. I turned on the baby monitor and went to the living room, settling onto the couch with a book. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Midnight would come quickly, and then I'd be out of here. But then I heard it, a cry, faint, muffled, and distant. I sat up listening. The baby monitor was silent, the green light blinking steadily. Another cry, a soft, pitiful wail. I put the book down and walked down the hallway. The nursery door was slightly ajar, just as I had left it. Inside, Lily lay exactly as she had before, still, peaceful, untouched. Yet, the crying continued. My skin prickled as I realized the sound wasn't coming from the crib. It was coming from the closet. The door was shut, but something about it felt wrong now, like the air around it was too thick, too heavy. The cries were louder now, desperate and shuddering, like a baby pleading for comfort. I swallowed hard, telling myself it had to be some kind of trick, Maybe a toy left on, maybe something outside. But no, it was coming from inside the closet. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. The crying stopped. Silence. I hesitated. The air smelled different, like something old and damp, like the smell of forgotten things. I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The closet was empty. Just a row of tiny dresses hanging neatly. A stack of folded blankets on the top shelf. A few pairs of baby shoes lined up like little soldiers. Nothing else. But the air was cold. So cold that I could see my breath. I closed the door quickly, heart pounding in my chest. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. And then the crying started again. Louder this time, angrier. A wailing, gasping, horrible sound that filled the room. Lily stirred in her crib, her little mouth opening in a sleepy yawn. But she didn't wake. My stomach knotted. I grabbed her, pressing her tiny body against my chest, my heart slamming in my ribcage. The crying was so loud now that it felt like it was coming from everywhere, pouring out of the walls, the floor, the air itself. I ran, out of the nursery, down the hall, through the front door. The night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I clutched Lily tight, running to my car, my hands fumbling with the keys. Inside, I locked the doors, my breath coming in short gasps. The house loomed in front of me, the nursery window dark and still. The crying had stopped the second I stepped outside. I waited. Minutes passed. An hour. Nothing. Just silence. At midnight, Hannah's car pulled into the driveway. I forced myself to look normal as she stepped out, smiling, completely unaware of what had happened. How was she? She asked, reaching for Lily. She was great, I lied, handing over the baby. My hands were still shaking. Hannah beamed. Told you she was a good sleeper. I didn't respond. I just wanted to get out of there. As I turned to leave, I glanced back at the house one last time, and I swear, from the nursery window, something was watching me. Story 5. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something darker. Something whispering in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite hear. The house had been there for as long as I could remember, standing at the very edge of town like a forgotten memory. Everyone knew about it. No one talked about it. A decaying Victorian with peeling paint, shattered windows, and a sagging porch that looked like it could collapse under a stiff breeze. I had driven past it 100 times, maybe 1,000. Sometimes, when I stopped at the light nearby, I swore I saw movement behind the broken glass. A flicker, a shadow, something that shouldn't be there. One gray afternoon, when the sky hung low and heavy, I finally did it. I parked my car down the block where no one would see. I don't know why I felt the need to be secretive. There were no cops patrolling this part of town, no neighbors peeking through curtains. No one cared. Still, I hesitated at the front steps, my fingers brushing against the rotting wooden railing. The air smelled thick and stale, like wet leaves and something else. Something metallic. I stepped inside. The air changed the second I crossed the threshold. It was still and heavy, pressing against me like a weight on my chest. The house was silent, but not the kind of silence you find in an empty place. It was deeper than that, a silence with intent. The floor groaned beneath my feet. Dust motes swirled in the fading afternoon light, hanging like tiny ghosts in the air. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, exposing the bones of the house. Dark wood, brittle and cracked with age. I moved carefully, stepping over broken glass. An old doll with a missing eye, the skeleton of something small and long dead. The air tasted wrong, like old paper and mildew, but beneath it was something sickly sweet. Like rot, I told myself I'd only look around for a minute, just long enough to satisfy my curiosity. Then I'd leave. The staircase loomed ahead, dark and yawning. The upstairs hall was even worse than the first floor. The doors were all closed, lined up like teeth in a broken grin. My pulse thrummed in my ears as I picked one at random and pushed it open. A bedroom. The walls were a faded blue, the kind of color that might have been bright once, but had long since been swallowed by time. A wooden dresser stood against the far wall, its mirror cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Dust clung to every surface. Then I saw it, a single chair, positioned in the center of the room, facing the mirror. The dust was thick on the floor, undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of anyone coming or going, except the chair was wrong. It looked recent. The wood wasn't as worn as everything else, the seat cleaner, like someone had been sitting there. Recently, a single chill raced down my spine, and I took a step back, suddenly wanting nothing more than to leave. Then, from behind me, I heard the sound of something shifting. I turned. The mirror. For a moment, I thought it was just my reflection, but then I saw it, just over my shoulder, in the glass. Something else was standing there. A figure, too tall, too thin. Its hand was reaching for my shoulder. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. Empty air. I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. That's when I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I bolted down the stairs, across the broken floor, and out into the gray, dying light of day. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I was in my car, locking the doors, breathing hard. I stared at the house, waiting for what, I don't know, maybe to see something in the window, maybe to hear something whisper my name, but there was nothing, just the house, empty and still. I drove away and never went back. But sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet, I swear I can still feel it. That cold hand, almost touching my shoulder. Story 6. It started as just another late night. Nothing unusual. I had been watching TV alone in the living room, wrapped in a thick blanket, my mind numbed by the glow of the screen. The show I had on wasn't anything scary, just some random late-night talk show. But as I turned off the TV, the silence hit me harder than I expected. The house was too quiet. You know that feeling when the air just changes? Like something is suddenly different, but you can't put your finger on it. That was what it felt like. A weight in the atmosphere, pressing down. I stretched and yawned, ready to head to bed. The hallway light was off, leaving it in darkness, but that didn't bother me. I'd walked that hallway 1,000 times before, knew every creak in the floorboards. But tonight, as I took my first step, something flickered at the edge of my vision. A movement. I stopped. My pulse kicked up, just a little. Maybe it was my shadow from the TV glow, I thought, but the TV was off. The only light now came from the kitchen behind me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to peek down the hall. That was when I saw it. A shadow, darker than the darkness around it. It stretched along the wall, just at the bend in the hallway, near the bathroom door. I didn't move. Shadows don't just move on their own. I squinted, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the eyes, maybe a weird afterimage from staring at the screen too long. But then it shifted, not like a flicker, not like a normal shadow. It moved with purpose, sliding along the wall, slinking forward like it knew I was watching. My throat went dry. It wasn't mine. My breath hitched as I saw it dart fast, too fast, into the bathroom. I should have turned around right then. Should have just gone back to the living room, slept on the couch, ignored it. But instead, I took a step forward. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Another step. The hallway stretched ahead, swallowing me in shadow. The bathroom door was open just a crack. I don't know why I kept going. Maybe because it was my house. Maybe because some stupid part of my brain thought it was ridiculous to be scared of a shadow. Maybe because I had to know. I reached the bathroom door and pushed it open. Darkness. The bathroom had no windows and the lights were off, making it pitch black inside. The air was colder here. My skin prickled. I reached for the light switch, my fingers trembling. Click. The bulb flickered on, buzzing faintly. Empty. Nothing there. I let out a shaky breath, laughing a little at myself. God, I was being an idiot. Just my mind playing tricks, that's all. I turned to leave, and then I heard it. A laugh. Soft. Almost playful. But cold. I felt it in my spine before I even registered it in my ears. I whipped around, my pulse a wild drumbeat. No one was there, just my own reflection in the mirror. But then, the reflection didn't move. I blinked. My reflection didn't. My breath stuttered. Then ever so slowly it smiled. I didn't. The grin stretched, wider and wider, lips curling too far, teeth too sharp. My own face, but wrong. The light flickered, and then the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. I spun, yanking at the handle, my breath coming in panic gasps. Locked. I pounded on the door, my own voice sounding distant in my ears. The mirror flickered, and I saw it. The shadow, crawling from the corners, stretching long fingers toward me. The light went out. I don't remember much after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, I was waking up on the cold bathroom floor. The door was open. The house was silent again. I stumbled to my feet, dizzy, my mind a mess of static and confusion. The mirror was normal. My reflection moved when I did. But as I stepped back into the hallway, I felt it. A weight. A presence. Like something was still watching. That night, I didn't sleep, and I never leave the bathroom door open anymore. Story 7. I was working late again. The office was a graveyard at this hour. Just the flickering fluorescent lights and the distant hum of the elevator, like a mechanical heartbeat pulsing in the silence. Everyone else had left hours ago. It was just me, my coffee gone cold, and the sound of my fingers tapping against the keyboard. I told myself I'd leave soon. Just finish this last report. Just one more email. That's how it always went. Then I heard it. A voice. Low, soft. a whisper, threading through the quiet like a draft under a locked door. Daniel, I froze. The sound had come from behind me. I turned my chair slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The office was empty. Just rows of dimly lit cubicles, the glow of computer screens in standby mode. I swallowed hard, forcing a chuckle. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe it was the air conditioning, the old vents rattling like they always did. I turned back to my screen, shaking my head. Then it came again, closer. Daniel. My breath hitched. I pushed back from my desk, my chair rolling against the floor. The voice wasn't just whispering. It was calling me. But here's the thing. No one calls me Daniel. Ever. I go by Dan. Have since college. The only people who ever called me Daniel were my parents, my teachers, and one other person. A person I hadn't thought about in years. I stood up. My legs felt stiff, like I'd been sitting for hours longer than I actually had. I told myself it was nothing, but my body didn't believe it. The air felt heavy. My skin prickled. I stepped out into the hallway, my footsteps swallowed by the carpet. The office stretched before me, all sharp angles and stale air. The glass doors to the conference room reflected the rows of empty desks, but something felt off. The voice had come from somewhere. It had to. I moved down the corridor, past the kitchenette with its humming refrigerator, past the darkened break room. I peered into the bathroom. Empty stalls, a row of sinks under a buzzing light. Nothing. But when I stepped back into the hall, I felt it. A shift in the air, like something had just moved. Then I heard it again. This time, right in my ear. Daniel. I spun so fast I nearly lost my balance. My breath came in short gasps, my heart hammering. But there was nothing there. Just the empty hall, stretching into the dark. And then I realized something. The voice hadn't just called my name. Not this time. It had said something else. A name I had forgotten. But as soon as I heard it, I remembered. Elliot. I hadn't thought about Elliot in years. Maybe even decades. The name cracked open something inside me. A memory buried so deep I had let it rot. Elliot. My childhood best friend. My first best friend. And the first person I ever truly hurt. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring into the empty office. My body felt separate from my mind, like I was floating outside myself. The past came rushing back, unspooling like an old film reel. Elliot's laughter, his small hands gripping the handlebars of his rusted bike, the way his face lit up whenever he saw me. And then, the lake, the cold water, the way I stood there, watching as he screamed for me, as he begged me, and I did nothing, because I was scared, because I was a coward, because I let him drown. A sound broke through the memory, not a whisper this time, not a name, a sob. I turned, and for the first time that night I saw it. At the end of the hall, just beyond the glow of my office light, stood a figure. It was small, hunched, barely more than a shadow. But I knew. The shape moved forward, dripping. The sound of wet footsteps on the carpet sent ice through my veins. I wanted to run. My body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the figure crawled closer, dragging itself toward me. Water pooled in its wake, dark and endless. The air smelled like rot, like the lake on a hot summer day. Then it lifted its head, and I saw Elliot's face. Bloated, blue. His mouth parted, but no air came out. Just water. Just the gurgling, choking sound of a boy who never made it to shore. His eyes locked onto mine, and I knew what he wanted. He wanted me to feel what he felt. He wanted me to drown. I don't remember running. I don't remember grabbing my keys, stumbling down the stairs, or bursting out into the night air. But somehow, I was in my car. Somehow, I was speeding down the highway, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The office disappeared behind me, but I knew I wasn't alone. Because in the silence of my car, above the sound of my ragged breathing, I heard it again. Low, soft, almost a whisper. Daniel. And I knew then I would never be alone again. Story 8. It started with a ring, a shrill, jarring sound that ripped me from the depths of sleep. I groaned, fumbling for my phone on the nightstand. The glow of the screen was harsh in the darkness, making my eyes water. Unknown caller. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, maybe curiosity, maybe unease, made me answer. Hello. My voice was thick with sleep. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in years. Hey, it's me. I felt my blood turn to ice. It was Sarah. Sarah, who had been my best friend in school. Sarah, who had died 5 years ago in a car accident. Sarah, who had been buried in the cemetery on Oakwood Hill. I sat up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. What? My throat was dry. What did you say? She laughed. A soft, familiar laugh, but there was something else underneath it. A hollowness, like wind whistling through a crack in a window. I asked how you were, she said. It's been a while. I couldn't breathe. This had to be a joke. A cruel, sick prank. Who is this? I demanded, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. Another laugh. This one quieter. It's me, silly. It sounded like her. Not just similar, exactly like her. I could picture her saying those words, the way she used to roll her eyes at me when I was being dense. But that was impossible. Sarah was gone. I don't know who you are, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. But this isn't funny. Silence. Then she sighed. A long, slow exhale. You don't believe me. No, I whispered. Okay. Her voice was lighter now, almost teasing. Let's prove it then. My skin prickled. What? You remember 8th grade? She asked. The time we skipped school and went to the quarries. My stomach dropped. No one knew about that. We had never told anyone. Not our parents, not our friends. It had been our secret. I gripped the phone tighter. My heart was pounding now so hard it hurt. She kept going, her voice smooth, unbothered. And you got scared because you thought you saw something in the water? You swore you saw a hand, remember? I remembered. It had been a stupid thing, the reflection of a branch or something. But I had been convinced it was a hand reaching up from the depths, pale and bloated. Sarah had laughed at me for it, and now she was telling me this 5 years after she had died. I swallowed hard. Who are you? I whispered. Another laugh, but this time there was no warmth in it. It was colder, like a draft slipping under a door. You know who I am? I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, "You're lying." A pause. Then she said something that made my entire body go numb. "You should really lock your front door." I froze. The phone slipped from my fingers and hit the bed. I twisted toward my bedroom door, heart hammering in my chest. The house was silent, but suddenly it didn't feel empty. My skin burned with the feeling of being watched. The front door. Had I locked it? I thought I had. I always did. But my mind was racing, trying to remember, trying to picture myself doing it before I went to bed. The phone was still on the bed, the call still connected. Slowly, with shaking hands, I picked it up again. "Sarah," I whispered. No response, just a soft crackle of static. Then the line went dead. The screen went black. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Then I heard it, a soft creak from the hallway outside my bedroom. I wasn't alone.